Okay, thanks for the invitation. My talk will be about the sharing economy, and one of the topics I want to address is the definition, because there's a lot of confusion. What belongs to the sharing economy, what does not? I will also then go into the dynamics, a bit of history, and a bit of possible futures. And then I'll end with some of the debates that are going on about how we should further develop and regulate the sharing economy. Now, I cut to chase, I go directly to my definition. This is my definition. I define the sharing economy as consumers who grant each other temporary access to their underutilized goods. Okay? This definition has three parts. It's about consumer-to-consumer interaction, it's about temporary access, and it's about goods. Now, if money is involved in such relationships, so if it's a consumer renting out a car, for example, or lending out the car, that's for me not an issue. So some people ask money for it in return, some people do not. In both cases, we have a phenomenon in which consumers grant each other temporary access to their physical goods. Well, if you use this definition, you can nicely distinguish the sharing economy in the middle from other parts of the current economy, which also have the same characteristics that internet platforms, are mediating these markets. So again, sharing economy, we talk about it if it's consumer to consumer, it's about temporary access, and it's about physical goods. If one of those three elements is not present, you actually talk about a different kind of economy. For example, if we talk about consumers who grant permanent access to their goods, meaning they sell their goods, we talk about the second-hand economy, eBay. Okay, huge platform, a lot of economic activity going on. If we talk instead about business-to-consumer interactions, so businesses who rent out their goods on a temporary basis to consumer, we talk about the product-service economy or rental economy, for example, Hertz, where you can rent a car. And finally, if we talk about consumers who give each other temporary access to their labor, to their time, we talk, so we don't longer talk about goods, but about services. And that's what people now call the on-demand or gig economy. Okay? Now, using this distinction, you can nicely explain why Uber is not part of the sharing economy, but BlaBlaCar is. I'll explain a bit the difference. So in BlaBlaCar is a website where you can find someone with whom to share a ride, hitchhiking. Okay? So you are already planning a trip. You would have 3 empty seats otherwise, but now you fill those seats with people who happen to go on the same day to the same destination. So that's hitchhiking or carpooling. Either way, it is sharing economy because you make better use of otherwise underutilized asset. If, however, you order a taxi, for example, through an Uber Pop app, you request a ride to another peer, and that means you create capacity. So it's not a case of underutilized capacity that gets better utilized, but you are creating capacity, you are buying someone's time, someone's labor. To make it even more complicated, the same platform can facilitate different types of economic activity through the same platform. Take Airbnb. Probably you all know how Airbnb works. So you can rent someone else's home or apartment for on a temporary basis. Now, if it's your own home where you normally live throughout the year, that you rent out, for example, if you are on holidays, you are making better use of otherwise underutilized assets, because otherwise your home would be empty. That's sharing economy. But if you would own 2 houses and rent out one of those on a permanent basis through Airbnb, you're running a hotel. and in most countries an illegal hotel. So it is exactly this definition that can explain where the tension is lying and why many cities put a cap on the number of days you are allowed to rent out your home. By providing a cap, you make sure it remains sharing economy and you avoid the rise of illegal hotels in your city. Okay. Think about from the consumer side, for example, I need to go from A to B. Again, you can use the scheme to understand why we now have 4 solutions and 4 alternatives for the purchase of a first-hand good. Okay, so now we have platforms that allow us to make use of a good, to have access to a good, even though you don't own it yourself. For example, you can buy a second-hand car. You can rent a car from another company. You can rent a car through the sharing economy from another consumer, or you can rent someone, a taxi chauffeur, that brings you to from A to B. So in all 4 cases, you have the solution to your problem, in this case, mobility. Now, a bit of history, because if you use the definition I use, consumers who grant each other temporary access to their physical goods, it is clear that sharing economy already existed maybe as long as mankind. But we didn't call it sharing economy because in all times, in all cultures, there was a practice in which people granted each other temporary access to their goods, either by lending out or renting out their goods. However, the difference with today is that before the advent of the internet, you would do that almost exclusively with family members, friends or neighbors, people you could trust. So it was very small practice and it was an informal practice and governments didn't care about it. Now what has changed with the rise of ICTs, in particular these platforms, is that they have reduced the transaction costs, which makes it possible now for you to start sharing your goods with complete strangers. And this is exactly the main service these platforms provide. They allow you to make sure that a stranger can be trusted. And they do that either by reviews, so you see how someone behaved in previous transactions, by insurance, micro-insurances, or guarantee funds and a strong brand. And because these transaction costs have fallen, a complete new market for what people call stranger sharing has emerged. And this can scale very, very fast. And the reason why it can scale from 0 houses to 20 million houses in less than 10 years, yeah, or from 0 cars to 100,000 cars in 5 years, is because the things that are being rented out were already there. They were already owned. So the platform does not have to do any investment except the software, which is not so difficult, and marketing. And they use media to do marketing because they make a lot of noise and media picks it up. Okay, so for me it's not a crisis phenomenon, it is here to stay. And why it's not a crisis phenomenon, it already emerged before the crisis. Yeah, so you have home swapping websites, for example, that already existed before the website. So the crisis has accelerated it, but not caused it. Now, what do people say about the future? Of course, the future is very uncertain because it grows very fast, but as a part of the whole economy, it's still rather small. And one trend people say is that while the sharing economy started as a consumer-to-consumer practice, where people would physically meet, shake hands, have a talk, maybe create friendships, now we move to an era of consumer to business to consumer, meaning in between the consumers, the platform is doing a lot of things. So in many cases now, if you rent an apartment through Airbnb, you do not meet the owner anymore. Okay, there are special agencies that take care of everything. This will only become more apparent if we move to the Internet of Things. So I think that in a few years from now, many of our goods will have a chip, will have a permanent connection to the Internet, which means that sharing becomes even more easy, yeah? Even easier. I can imagine a time where on Sunday evening You open up your Outlook agenda and you tick all the items on all the days that you don't use it, and then you offer it on the market. Maybe it's rented out, maybe not, you don't care, you don't need to know. And the next week you see what you earned by renting out your goods. And that can all be in a seamless way, can be all be organized through Internet of Things. Okay, I skipped the last point. So now about the promise of the sharing economy, because many people thought it was a perfect example of a sustainable innovation in the meaning of people, planet, profit. It's good for people because people meet other people. Strangers meet, new relationships can occur. It's good for planet because we have to produce less if we utilize better what we already have. Lower energy use, lower waste. And it's good for economic welfare because where two people trade, two people win. Okay? There is a lot of consumer surplus, as economists call it, created. But is it really all that positive? Well, I think on the profit side, it's clear a lot of money is being made, especially through home sharing. However, not everyone makes the same amount of money. The people who profit really from the sharing economy are homeowners in cities that are high in demand and people owning the platform. All the others may profit a bit. And there may even be true losers in the sharing economy, because if you do not participate in the sharing economy, if you do not profit from lower rental prices for whatever reason, but you happen to live next to someone who's renting out the apartment many times a year, you may have negative externalities. You may feel unsafe, you have noise, etc. So there are true problems now in cities because of home sharing. Planet, okay, I think it's positive but small. It's mainly in car sharing and carpooling that benefits are being made. And one reason the benefits are only small is because the main effect of sharing economy is that people can rent goods for lower prices. It means they save money and they will spend the money on other things, and those things also consume energy. Okay? So that's what is called the rebound effect. Then on the people side, of course, people get to know each other, strangers meet. However, one problem, for example, is discrimination. So in the old economy, if you would buy a good in a shop, whatever your color, age, or skills, you would be treated in the same way and get the same item for the same price. At least that is how it was regulated. And except in the labor market, I think discrimination was pretty small in the old economy. But when peers interact, they have the tendency to trust people who are very much like them. Okay? And they have a tendency also to distrust people that are minorities or have a bad spelling in their communication, etc. And this has already been proven by statistical research on Airbnb. Afro-Americans get lower prices for the same house, same location. So this is a downside. Now then there are other issues. For example, you see protests by hosts of Airbnb who want Airbnb to be legal, and those that have to pay higher rents because house prices go up in neighborhoods where Airbnb is popular, and they want Airbnb to be regulated and closed down. And the problem with the sharing economy is that we follow this type of process. Okay, we have companies here in the end. We have companies who introduce an innovation without asking anyone. Okay, they introduce a platform. Then the policymakers, they have to react. They have to react fast because it scales very fast. It creates problems in neighborhoods. It creates unfair competition. Think of Uber Pop, and they start to regulate. Only then we have a public debate, that's the microphone. So only now we start thinking about its desirability, and the very left one, that's science. Scientists are nowhere. And the reason is not that they don't find this interesting, but they don't have the data to do their research. And why is that? because the platforms will not share their data. They want you to share your goods, but they won't share their data. So scientists cannot do their traditional job, and that's the other arrow, to assess the risks, benefits, costs, distribution, effects of a new technology. So they cannot inform the public and politicians about what's actually going on. So that regulation is very much ad hoc and based on intuition and not on scientific evidence. So what everyone hopes for is that at some time data are being released, not only for scientists to do their job, but also for politicians to do their job. Because politicians have made up rules. For example, in Amsterdam, where I live, 60 days is the maximum per year you can rent out your home. Everyone agrees that's a sensible rule. However, the local government cannot enforce that rule because they cannot see how many nights each apartment is being rented out. That's only something Airbnb can see. Okay, final slide. What are the issues? Maybe that's maybe things we can pick up in the discussion. Well, what economists worry about is that these platforms are natural monopolies, because if you have a two-sided marketplace, so many buyers, many sellers, it makes sense for them to go to the platform where most people go, because then you have the highest chance on a good match, a good price. And you see that with home sharing. For example, Airbnb has by far the largest market share. But then monopolies are not always bad. Because in a static sense, meaning at each moment in time, monopoly may be able to charge a bit too much money. But if this money is used to invest in new innovations, new technologies, because they are afraid a new platform may enter with a smarter model, they will still use this money to keep on innovating. And I think at least at this stage, we see that there's a lot of innovation going on. So there's dynamic efficiency here. There are also reasons to believe, and then I go to the last point immediately, that although the platforms we witness now are almost all venture capital financed, so they, if you like, they are traditional corporations, that does not mean that in the future we cannot build alternative platforms. And people already experiment with platform cooperatives, so where the users are also the owner of the platform, where also the code, so the software that's being used, is also developed through open source communities. And there are even examples where governments take the lead that do not want to be dependent on Airbnb and start their own home sharing platforms. So this is, I think, an area where inspiration is taken from your sector. Then finally, on the regulation. Okay, well, I follow, of course, through social media, the whole debate on the sharing economy, but even a regular newspaper reader will read each week one or more articles about the sharing economy, and most of the time it's about regulation. And okay, we can talk about the content of regulation, what is smart regulation, but it's the deeper question is who will regulate in the first place. Okay, so we see that governments take up the traditional role that they want to regulate this. However, it's hard for them to enforce their regulations if they do not have access to the data. So other people say, well, let platforms self-regulate, because it's in the interest of the platform that problems are minimized and that their reputation is not damaged. But that, of course, goes against a kind of democratic feeling that all participants should be treated in the same way. And the final way would be to regulate through the users. Okay. So, for example, in the Netherlands, we tax the users who make money on platforms. In Belgium, they want to tax the platforms. Okay, that then will charge the users. And there are pros and cons of both. So I have 20 seconds left, so I guess it leaves enough time for a discussion, and I hope it was useful for you.
So Koen, you have posted 2 questions to
Yes.
the audience.
Yes.
I think we should take them up on the board here. Could we have the questions, please? Okay, that's the pictures. Do we have some questions? Yes, we do. Self-regulation by sharing platforms is more desirable than government regulation. What do you think about that? Do you think it should be that way, or should it not? Or do you have no opinion at all? So please put your hands on the trigger as you did before, and we will have a result. No, they don't like the self-regulation. What do you think about that?
Well, I see this as a scientist, I would say almost 50-50, given the small sample size.
Yes.
I'm a bit surprised. I would have expected a large majority for government regulation. And most people want government to take action, while the platforms argue they can do it themselves. So it's a bit like the Silicon Valley ideology versus, let's say, continental Europe ideology. And maybe we can mix it in some way. No?
That sounds good. We have another question too. Have you started a plan to...
Oh, that's another one.
No, it's ahead. In 10 years' time, most people will no longer own a car. Is that true? Yes or no? Or it will take longer? What do you think about that? Okay. No, they don't really believe that. But as a scientist, you have another review on this.
Well, it's very hard to tell how fast this development will unfold. But what is very interesting is that if you look at all the big car makers, they all develop their own sharing models. So they want you to rent your car and no longer own your car. And one reason is that even though they may be forced to produce fewer cars per car, they can make much more money because they retain ownership over the car. They also retain ownership over the data the car and the drivers are generating. Probably depends on how we are going to design the law. And they retain continuous communication channel with you. So that's a great way to do marketing, to do entertainment, to sell all kinds of other services. So I think the big car manufacturers are preparing for the future, for this future, but it may take a bit longer than 10 years.
Okay, good. Do we have any questions? Yes, over there. Could someone provide a mic? Do we have a microphone? Over there? Here? Raise your hand, please. Yeah, good. You're getting a mic there.
Oui, d'abord, je voudrais vous remercier. C'est l'usage dans ces conférences de dire que le speech a été particulièrement intéressant, mais dans votre cas, j'ai trouvé que c'était très vrai. Je voudrais vous poser une question qui a trait justement à la conjonction. Is it clear for the interpreter?
I understand French.
Ma question est la suivante. Vous savez que nous sommes des modèles qui pratiquons la solidarité. Vous semble-t-il que dans les processus de règlement des sinistres, je pense notamment, nous avons le cas en France en ce moment et beaucoup en Europe, de biens qui ne sont pas possibles à occuper parce qu'ils sont inondés, par exemple, ou suite à un incident. De la même façon, beaucoup d'entre nous traitent de façon marchande le prêt de véhicules en cas de sinistre pour maintenir la mobilité de l'assuré. Vous semble-t-il, en tant que spécialiste, que nos institutions auraient intérêt à travailler sur des formes nouvelles de solidarité, de mise en moyens, d'indemnisation, si je puis dire, en nature du sinistre, mais de façon non marchande, à travers des mises en œuvre de solidarité active, où cela vous semble-t-il beaucoup trop lourd au plan administratif? Voilà, c'est ma question et j'espère qu'elle n'est pas trop stupide.
Could someone shortly summarize the question? Is it whether your sector could be helpful in creating business models that are not for monetary? Okay.
Well, as a matter of fact, as you know, when you have a problem, for instance, you have people who cannot use his house because of a fire, of water.
No, I understand your question.
Or the same way for a car.
Yeah.
And the idea was, is it possible?
Yeah.
But because we're not in a barter economy.
Yeah.
The problem is to organize in the field of our guarantees.
Yes.
What are we doing? Which it's specificity of the mutual or cooperative system, which is to say solidarity and not monetary solidarity, which is in the insurance field, but it would give, I think, a spatial flavor, I would say, to our way of insuring people.
If I pick up on your question about sudden disasters, for example, we already see that social media and certain sharing economy platforms are spontaneously being used to coordinate among people. And also with terrorist attacks, for example, people spontaneously offered their homes, this can be further improved, I think. For example, that the government collaborates with these platforms in cases there is an emergency, how the platform should operate, and for example, that they should stop charging prices. And that was, for example, in the case of Uber, a PR disaster when there was a shooting in Sydney, and they had their surge pricing algorithm on, meaning suddenly everyone wanted a taxi, price went up to $100 or so, because they didn't know what was the reason, and that shows that algorithms cannot always work in the same way, depending on the context, and indeed, if people are more socially inclined to help each other, or in normal days, they may ask a fee. So I think it's an interesting question. Yeah.
Good. I think we will end the questions there so we can go on with all the rest of the panel. Thank you, Mr. Koen.